So I hope there's nobody here who's already heard this presentation. But if you're like me, if you heard it several years ago, you've probably forgotten it.
Yeah.
I am reminded, I'm looking to see if Karen Cole is in here. Okay. Well, I am reminded that years and years and years ago, I did this presentation at a Spellbinders annual meeting. And in the next room, I'm talking about how you, as Karen says, how you trick up a story, how you make it your own. And in the very next room, Karen was doing a workshop on how you honor the classic stories. Now, I say this as an introduction because Karen and I really agree that there are certain stories you shouldn't change, or not change much. But I've had people in workshops tell me that you're supposed to memorize the story and say it word for word. Now, there might have been a time in my life when I could have done that, but not anymore. And so I can assure you that this workshop will not be exactly like the last one because I don't remember what I did last time. But how many of you consciously think when you read a story? How many of you, is the first thing you think when you read a story or hear a story, I want to tell that story? How many of you, that's sort of a natural reaction? Okay. And how many of you think, I want to tell that story, but I'd like to make a few changes? So I may be preaching to the choir here, but let me just tell you that I think the way to own the story, to make it your own, is to make some minor changes to it. Not changes in the meaning, not changes in the characters, but changes in the story. Maybe sometimes a change in the character. So my advice to you, I see a few new people, there's usually a lot of old timers too. My advice to you is start with a story you love. And it's easy to find that. I mean, if you read a story and think, I can tell that story, then that's probably a story you love. As I've gotten and been in storytelling longer, I find I'm more easily struck by a story that I hear. If I hear somebody tell a story, I think, yeah, that's a story I can tell. And I've heard people tell stories that I've read and thought I didn't like them. And then I hear somebody tell it and I say, oh yeah, that's a tellable story. So I also think when we're talking about making a story your own, I don't think you can help making a story your own. You're not, does anybody memorize their stories? I mean, and tell them verbatim? And you know, both of the Spellbinder groups that I belong to, once a year, we have 4 people tell the same story. Yeah. And it's not ever the same story. Yes. Well, there's an exception to that. One year in the Broomfield chapter, or LLC, back then it was a chapter, we had 4 people tell the same story. And they chose a story that we had all learned in training from one particular teller. And it was sort of her trademark story. It's Joe Hayes, the gum-chewing rattlesnake. But she had personalized it. And 4 people came up and told that story exactly the way she had told it. And it was the dullest meeting I've ever been. So whatever you do, whether you do anything else that's in this handout, you're going to make a story your own just because you're going to tell it in your style, your voice, and so forth. But I think you can do even more to personalize the story. And I'm big into acronyms. And so I know when Scott introduced me at the first meeting, he sort of made a funny face when he talked about putting your arms around a story. Well, ARMS is an acronym for it. I think there's 4 ways you can change a story. You can add to it, elaborate it. You can relocate it, which I do a lot. In case you haven't figured it out yet, I grew up in the South. And I'll often relocate my stories to the South. You can modify and massage it. And you can make substitutions in the story. So I'm gonna quickly talk about those things, and we you can add to it if you want, if you can, if you feel like it. I'm gonna give you a little bit of food for thought at the end about how much you can modify a story. I'm gonna give you one example, and if we have time, I will give you a sheet where at your table you can pick a story and talk about what you can do to it. If I don't have time, you can take the handout home and do it at a LLSO meeting. So, let's talk about adding to a story, because that's the longest list. You can add details. You can add facts if you've got facts. If you tell historical stories, you're not going to find the story waiting for you. You're going to have to put it together yourself. So you can add details. You can add descriptions, particularly every story, every book I read on storytelling says you've got to help the audience feel the story and appeal to all of their five senses. Anybody remember what the five senses are? Because I'm more leaning toward the sixth sense, which is humor. I think I work really hard at trying to find, if I tell a story, unless it's a really serious story, where I don't get a couple of laughs, I'm not happy. And so you can do puns, you can do similes, you can do metaphors. This is all language stuff. You can do unusual or funny words. I did a workshop this month for one of the groups I belong to that spent the whole time talking about how you add humor to a story. And let me just, I think I brought a couple of examples. Maybe I didn't. Yeah, I did. So, any of you tell tall tales? Oh, really? That's not enough of you.
Not many.
Okay, well, anyway, tall tales are built around hyperbole, exaggeration. Breath so bad it would paralyze a rattlesnake. That's a hyperbole. Ran so fast I got there before I left. So lazy that his favorite exercise was chewing. So tall tales just beg for that sort of thing. And then you can add to your story with similes. Happy as a pig in mud is one that everybody around where I grew up talks about. Slow as a crippled turtle. So it's a comparison that lets the listener make it, see how funny it is. How many of you look for funny words in your stories? Yeah, and if you're interested, you can Google 100 funny words, and you'll get funny words like bamboozle and catty corner or kitty corner.
Cattywampus.
Cattywampus, yeah. Hornswoggle. So, and you throw a word like that in, and typically your listeners may not know what it means, but usually in context they can figure it out. And so but it amuses them. And then puns. I've been known to do a pun or two. And you can somehow figure out a way to put those work into stories. She was only a moonshiner's daughter, but he loved her still. And if cows return to the marijuana field, is that the pot calling the cattle back? All right, I'll quit now. Anyway, look for ways to do humor. Music. How many of you can sing? Okay, I'm not allowed to sing even in church, but if you can sing, work some music into your stories. And if you can't sing, work some poetry into your stories. Repetition. And
would you put your microphone closer to your mouth?
No, it's kind
do
of
what?
Mic close to mouth.
No, it's all right.
Our technical expert just adjusted my mic. I don't think I moved it, but is it?
You're doing fine. We just have a little godly interference.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
just
Too
cuts out.
bad. So repetition in getting your audience to call and respond is a good way to add to the story. If you can do sound effects, do sound effects. Or if you're telling the kids, get the kids to do some sound effects for you. And with the right consideration, you can use pictures. I often use a picture at the start of a story and say, this is, if I think I'm talking about something they don't know about, I will show them the story, the picture, and then I put it up, and don't let the kids get near it. Okay, so the other thing you can do is relocate the story, move it someplace new. You move to a new place, you move to a different time period. One of the stories I love to tell is O. Henry's The Gift of the Magi. If you read the original story, the cost of things in that story is so low, nobody's going to understand it. So I changed the price. And I will have to admit, the last time I told it, I even stopped it being about Christmas because I'm getting real sensitive about holidays in the schools. And so I changed it so that the husband and wife had the same birthday and they celebrated it. They made it their own personal holiday. I also found out that I don't know enough about various versions of stories because I told Gift of the Magi to third graders a couple of years ago. And when I finished, one of the third graders said, there's a Mickey Mouse story just like that. Did anybody know that? I see you nodding. So there's a Mickey Mouse version of The Gift of the Magi. They were very quiet and listened to my version, but I learned something. All right, this is I call it modify and massage. Everybody remember training where we learned about the most important thing?
Yeah, sure.
Who let these people in here? All right, well, sometimes you read a story and you don't think the most important thing is the same as the author might have thought it was. Anyway, so so that can affect the way you tell a story. When I took training, the story I told the first story I told in training was the hare and the tortoise. And as everybody feels, I think, when they're in training, and it's time to tell the first story, you're thinking, please, Lord, don't let it be me that has to go first. But you're also worried about, what if the person that goes ahead of me tells the same story?
Yeah.
Well, when I was in training, I didn't want to go first. And so this young woman who was in the class with me, there were just three of us, she got up and told the tortoise and the hare. And she did a dynamite job with lots of motion, and she just did a dynamite job. And I thought, okay. And then I realized that I was going to tell the hare and the tortoise with a different moral. And so I told it differently. She emphasized the fact that, what is it? Slow and steady. I focused on the fact that Hare was a braggart, and that what he had lost was not just the race, but the right to brag. And all the other animals had watched it happen. And so it was a totally different story, because when I was telling the story, I was emphasizing his bragging all the way through the story. So, you can change, you can tell it in the first person. Lots of stories I read, I think, this would be better if I could tell it first person. Sometimes it's written in the first person, and sometimes it's just easier to tell it in the first person. And you can change the point of view. A lot of folks, I've got almost, how many of you tell a classic story from the point of view of somebody other than the heroine in a classic story, or hero, heroine? Not, okay, a few. There's lots of stories about, one of the stories I tell regularly to second graders is a book called a book by Alan MacDonald called Beware the Bears. And it's the story of what happened after 3 bears came home and found out what Goldilocks had done to their house. And it is a hysterical story. Second graders, I've told it to third graders too. They love it. So beware the bears. And there's lots of Red Riding Hood from the point of view of the big bad wolf. in one of my less sane moments, I wrote a version of Jack and the Beanstalk from the Giants' point of view. And it's on the Spellbinder website. And so you can substitute real people if you're telling someplace where they might know that those real people are. And those of you who know me know that I often take my grandfather, who was the first storyteller I knew, and he's the reason I call myself Pop, because I call him Pop. I regularly, if I can figure out a way to do it, I tell the story with Pop in it and his point of view. It doesn't change the story and the content of the story as far as I'm concerned. You can use familiar or easily pronounced names. Some of the problems I have, I like some stories where the characters' names are almost unpronounceable. And I think of somebody who actually taught me as a storyteller when I first joined Spellbinders. Any story he told, if there was a princess in it, she was Princess Anna. No matter what her name was in the story, because he could always remember that, and it didn't change the story. So you can have easily, you can look for funny names. One of the things I've done, and anybody here familiar with Gamble Rogers? Okay, that's too bad. Gamble Rogers was a musician and storyteller who died young, drowned trying to save somebody else. And he told outrageously funny stories, all set in this fictional county in Florida. He created a whole community of crazy people with crazy names, and he would tell their stories. If you want to see what he did, you can Google him, and there's still a few of his videos on YouTube. Gamble Rogers. And it's like Aquilanaha County, Florida. He's got names that are appropriate, and I've done sort of the same thing. I've created a community in North Georgia called Booger Holler. Doesn't have anything to do with your nose. It's boogers are haunts, ghosts, and a holler is a deep valley. And I actually grew up near Booger Holler in Georgia. There's also one in Arkansas. But I've populated it not only with my grandfather, but with a whole family called the Nut family. And that usually gets a few laughs out of the kids. I mean, the father's name was Peter Nut, but everybody shortened that down. Pretty soon he was Pete Nut, and then pretty soon they were calling him Pete Nut. And since in Georgia we call peanuts goobers, his nickname became Goober. And he married a woman named Hazel Brown. And they had two kids, the twin boys named Chester and Walnut. So they became Chester and Walter, so they became Chestnut and Walnut. But anyway, you could play, once you start that, you can sort of carry it on if you choose to. And you can, if you're telling an old story, you may want to put modern equivalents in it. As I said, the dollar amounts of the gift of Magi are tiny. It's probably less than kids get for their lost tooth now. So anyway, enough talk. I'm going to try to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Excuse me just a minute. All right, I think on the back of your handout, there's a story that I found on the internet. I don't want you to read it yet. If you haven't already read it yet, if you have read it, forget about it. If you haven't read it, turn it over and don't look at it yet. Because I want to tell you what I did to change that story. And then I'm going to ask you to read the story that I started with and see if you can talk about what I did, which are those techniques I just talked to you about, what I did, and any others you can think of that I should have used. So this is a story I call the Wily Old Coyote. Once upon a time, not all that long ago, and not all that far away, there was a coyote who had been around for a long time. And he'd been through a lot of changes. He'd seen a lot of changes. And he wasn't nearly as young as he used to be, so he lost some of his hearing, lost a little bit of his eyesight. He certainly lost his speed. He couldn't track down rabbits and deer like he used to be able to. Anybody can relate to that probably. But he still survived. I mean, coyotes are survivors, and he managed to have a pretty good life. And then one day, he went out hunting, and he went further than he usually went, and all of a sudden, he realized he was lost. And he wasn't too worried about it, but then he looked, and coming over the hill was a cougar, looking like it had plans to make lunch out of that coyote. And so the coyote looked around. He didn't see any place he could hide. He wasn't familiar with the territory. He didn't know where he could run to. So he was desperate. He thought, what am I going to do? And then he saw down very near him a pile of bones. And so he lay down next to those bones and he started chewing on one of them. And when he sensed that the cougar was getting close, he said at the top of his voice, This is the best cougar I ever ate. I wonder if there are any others around here. Well, with this, the cougar, who happened to be a young cougar, stopped and took another look at that coyote, and he thought, well, maybe that coyote is tougher than he looks. Said, I'm not that hungry anyway. And so he turned and left. And it just so happens that there was a prairie dog watching this happen. And the prairie dog thought, if I tell that cougar how he was tricked, he'll be my friend. And I can always use a big cougar for a friend. So the prairie dog chases after the cougar. And when he catches up with him, he tells him how he's been tricked. And the cougar says, will you hop on my back? And I'm gonna go back down there and I'm gonna show you what happens when a conniving canine confuses a cute cougar like me. And so I felt like is it gone? Okay.
There you go.
So the cougar goes back. And the coyote hadn't had sense enough to leave yet. He's still there. And he sees the cougar going back, and he sees the prairie dog, and somehow or other he knows that he's been ratted out. And so he looks around again, and nothing's changed. So he lies down in front of those bones again. And when he's sure the cougar's close enough to hear him, he says, I wonder what's taking that prairie dog so long. I sent him out an hour ago to bring me another cougar. And he waited a minute, and then he looked over his shoulder, and the cougar was gone, and the prairie dog was gone. And the coyote chuckled to himself and said, well, I may be old and slow, but I'm just as clever as I ever was.
Yay.
Now, turn on the back of your handout, and down at the very bottom is an internet joke, a clean internet joke. Those aren't easy to find. Read that, and then at your table, why don't you talk about which of the techniques I said you could use, you saw used. Have y'all had enough time, or do you need? You ready to share? Okay, I'm going to assume you're ready to share. And here comes the tricky part. You're going to talk really loud because I am stone deaf. So what did you see in terms of the internet joke versus my story? What changes did I make?
First thing is characters were different.
Okay, different characters. because I moved it to the west and I don't know where.
Yeah.
Well, I think cougar's a lot funnier name than whatever, panther.
Panther, yeah. Well, and there was a place where I was going to want to use alliteration, and I couldn't think of any alliteration that worked with a panther. So yeah. Ed.
Now, the particular change is the coyote, the well-known trickster directly in folklore. That's a trickster.
Right.
As the other story didn't have a well-known trickster character.
Well, that's true, and and I guess not everybody knows who the well-known tricksters are. I guess if they're well enough known, people know who it is. But yeah, that's good. Yeah. I'm trying to think why I chose the coyote. Probably because I was new to Colorado and I had never seen a coyote before, and I saw one. So, yeah. All right, what else did I do? Yes, ma'am.
You added a lot more context in terms of setting the age of the coyote.
Okay.
You did that front, so that was nice.
Yes. It was easier for me to talk about the age.
Now, Wynn's gonna stay between these blue lines so he can stay on the camera. And I'm gonna repeat what he
Okay,
says.
I'm going to stay here. I apologize. I violated the storytelling principles of staying right here. So, do it. Gene, you had your hand up.
Yes, you use the term "rat it out," which the kids will be able to identify.
Okay. Good. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah. And I thought it was, in my mind, there's not much difference between a rat and a prairie dog. So I thought rat it out was a good term. Yeah.
Well, in the internet version, you hear about the dog, and I thought, what's a dog doing way out in the middle? Plus, Judy brought up the point, well, some of the kids might have a German Shepherd, and they might sort of focus on, oh, poor German Shepherd, not pay attention to the rest of the
Right, okay, yeah, that's a good point. I guess I never even considered including, or if I told it as a dog story, I would not have included a breed. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
You changed the ending where the dog, in your version, the dog spoke for himself, that he was just as good as ever. And in this story, there's a moral.
Right. And I violated one of my normal rules. I usually don't give the moral of the story. When I do Aesop, I don't give a moral.
Yeah.
Because I want the kids to tell me what they think the moral is. Most of them they can have more than one meaning. All right, anything else? I think y'all were paying attention. That's great.
Surprised?
Yeah, come on. So, all right, so now that I got you on the back page of the handout, I do want you to, I don't want to come into this too lightly. So I'll give you some food for thought. That isn't one of our responsibilities as Spellbinders volunteers to ensure that the young listeners know the classic stories. I mean, isn't that part of our mission? And so, if it is, how much changing should we do? And then there's this and yet, and this is Jane Wolin, who is one of the big names in storytelling. If we have similar stories from multiple cultures, my wife, when she was teaching middle school, they had a whole semester on Cinderella stories. There are probably 100 or more Cinderella stories. Everybody's got one. Jane Wolin says, for centuries, bits and pieces of stories, archetypical characters, situations, and so forth, have been lifted from one teller's quilt and sewn into another. And I mean, so yes, we got to keep the classic stories alive. Do we have to keep them alive verbatim? I would say no. And then has anybody read Pete Seeger's storytelling book? You ought to read it. I mean, you have read it? Yes, it is Pete Seeger. I mean, there's some great stories in there. And one of the things he says early on is, don't be afraid to embellish stories, to make up names and places, or to add new characters and subplots. And anything Pete thinks is okay, I think is okay. And then this is a quote. Sorry. Yes.
I'm just assuming you and Pete hang out a lot.
Oh, do you? Okay, well, good. Be careful. You're not as young as you used to be. All right, and then this long quote from a minister and storyteller. And, when when I think of good storytellers, a lot of them are ministers. I mean, a good minister, almost by my definition, is also a good storyteller. And this is a long quote. Making a story one's own is the difference between a living story and a dead story. A living story is told and retold and changes and grows. A dead story is told over and over, each time exactly like the last. And you can read the rest of it, but you cannot really copyright a living story because it does not belong to you any more than your children belong to you. But then there's Joseph Bruchac, and I tell a lot of Joseph Bruchac stories, and he says the stories are older and wiser than I am. Doesn't stop him from putting them in picture books, though. So I think it's okay to change the story as long as it's done with respect and giving full credit to the original. When I'm telling in the classroom, I always tell the kids, this is my version of such and such a story. And I encourage you to go to the library and find some other stories by that author. And my favorite author to do that with is Robert Munsch. If you don't know Robert Munsch, you need to know Robert Munsch. M-U-N-S-C-H. He wrote a story called Andrew's Loose Tooth that if you tell the second graders, you sit down the first day and you look in the room and you say smile, and there's not a full amount of teeth in there. And so let me tell you a story about a little boy named Andrew. And Andrew's got loose tooth that won't come out. Now here's the scary thing about that story. Not only is Munch a great storyteller, he's got a great illustrator.
Yeah, he does.
And this story, who finally has to come and have to get the tooth out, is the tooth fairy. And the tooth fairy arrives on a motorcycle. Dressed with a necklace of teeth around her neck. And she takes off her helmet and she's got bushy hair. I mean, it is. So I try to describe that, but then I say, to get the picture of this tooth fairy, you need to go look at Robert Munch's book. So why would you want to change the story? Marianne?
I found myself telling stories about brave boys. There are a lot of stories about brave boys, and I decided I needed a girl. So I just changed one of the characters to a girl and gave her a name.
Yeah, and that probably makes your listeners of both genders look at the story differently. And that's true. Most of the classic stories there are more and more books of stories of brave women, brave girls. But yeah, and if you can do it without making any other changes, that's great. Anything else?
How about dialect? Not using dialect.
Okay, yeah. I do not use dialect when I tell.
Except Southern.
Well, yeah, I do use that occasionally, only if it's appropriate. But I mean, if you can use dialect, use it. But don't forget halfway through the story that you're telling it in dialect. I mean, that's. Or if you have one character with dialect and another character without it, be sure that you don't get confused. I don't. But so inserting dialect might work if it works for you. So
Another question over here.
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to answer a question.
Oh, okay. Answer a question.
I
Okay.
want to know why people change stories.
Okay.
And I do it to increase understanding and
Okay.
having them relate to what I'm saying, something that is alive for them, it's involved in their lives.
All right.
It's something that they don't know anything about.
Okay. Sure. All right. So, I mean, do you modernize it? Yeah. No, that's a great reason, particularly with us telling the kids. And I'm always surprised what they know and what they don't know. One of my rules, the rules I lay out when I first meet a class every year, is I don't want you to. Once I start a story, don't stop me unless I use a word you don't understand. And if I use a word you don't understand, raise your hand, and give you that, because Denny Thompson's not in here. Denny tells a story about, he was telling a story about a donkey. And there was one of Denny's long, elaborate stories about a donkey. And when he finished the story, he said, anybody got any questions? The little boy raised his hand and said, yeah, what's a donkey? So whatever that story was, he missed it. So here's some reasons that I've listed, make it easier for you to remember and tell, make it a better match for your telling persona, who you are as a teller. Make it easier for your listeners to comprehend, and more actively engage the listeners. Sometimes you can do that. And to feed your creative self, because we'll tell the same story over and over and over again, maybe I'll change it a little bit. And then to fill the allotted time. We all know we got a certain amount of time to tell, and I've been known to extend the story because I had more time, and I didn't have any riddles. But I've also been known to shorten the story because I could see the clock. And I had something happen to me last month that had never happened to me before. One of the things I insist on when I'm telling is a seat where I can see the clock.
Yes.
And so I'm sitting in a classroom telling the story, and I can see the clock. It's on the wall up there. And I'm out of time. And so I say, well, thank you very much. I got to go. And they say, well, you're not through. And I said, what do you mean I'm not through? It says, and they said, look over here. And the teacher had on her desk a digital clock that did not match the time up there. And I still had 3 minutes to tell according to her clock. So be sure you've got your eye on the right clock. At the bottom here, I've said how much change can you make, and I think you can. Anybody can make minor changes. It's what I call a gentle hug with your arms, and you can make major changes to lesser known stories like the internet. But always acknowledge the original. I guess the internet later. I don't acknowledge the internet. You can, with good reason, make major changes even to a classic, like I did the O. Henry story. But you should identify and explain those changes to your listeners. And you can do whatever you want to with a story you find on the internet without even naming the source. According to that clock, we've got some time. Is that the official clock?
Sure.
All right, I have here in my hand 4 stories you can own. They're short, all about a paragraph long. I would like for you at your table, pick one of these stories and talk about how you could change it, how you would change it. And I'll give you, I don't know, 7 minutes or so, and then we'll talk about it. Take those if you would. Hello. I'm looking for a couple. We got about 5, I got close to 10 minutes left. I'm looking for volunteers to come up here and tell me which story you decided to change and what you did to it. At your table. Come on up here so we can hear you. It's going to take him a while so somebody else can start now too. They say it doesn't sound like it. Hello. Okay. All right. This is Mr. Jim.
We looked at several of the stories, but first one would be a little hard to change, but I had my eye on the second story, the Halloween story, make it a personal story that the friend that I grew up with, Herkimer Aloysius Dortmund, we grew up since the 3rd grade, so it was he and I were walking by the cemetery, and so we made it into a personal story. And Herkimer Aloysius Dortmund would be hard to misspell, or would be easy to misspell.
Okay.
Oh, that's good.
All right. Okay. Next victim. Who else wants to come?
Okay.
We decided on the second one, the Halloween encounter. So these two children were just about done trick-or-treating, and they were walking along, and soon they came by a graveyard. And they decided, let's go in and look for some ghosts. Maybe there's some ghosts in here. And they walked in there, and they heard this strange noise coming from behind a tree. And they thought, oh, could that be a ghost? And they crept closer and closer, and they saw this man with a hammer and a chisel just pecking away. And they went up to him, wow, mister, we really thought you were a ghost. And the guy turns and he grins, he goes, well, you see this gravestone? They misspelled my name, and I'm fixing it.
Okay, we got time for one more. Come on up here. Come on down. Oh, I never met so many bashful storytellers in my entire life. Come on, Jason.
I'm not going to flesh out the story because we didn't get to that. However, one of our participants at the table talked about changing the ending of Cinderella to she becomes friends with the fairy godmother and hangs out with her because she's a wonderful character, and the heck with the prince. So feminism. And then another participant at our table talked about the version of Cinderella becoming Cinderfella. And,
It's a Jerry Lewis movie, by the way.
oh, okay, wonderful. So that's what our table discussed.
Well, wait, before you leave, hold on. So, was Cinderfella at the start of the story, or did the change happen during the story? Now you know why I'm not let out in public. Yes, ma'am. One more.
Well, I was telling the three little pigs.
Raise the microphone up.
Okay, I was telling the three little pigs, and everybody knows that story, and the kids' eyes were beginning to glaze over. So I decided the wolf was up on the top of the roof of the house, and you know how the real story goes. The wolf goes down the chimney and the pigs get him. I changed it. He was up on the roof, and a fire truck went by, and I made the fire truck sound, you know. And oh, he was excited about the fire truck. And oh, yes, the wolf was excited about the fire truck, jumped down off the roof, scattered after the fire truck, and the pigs thought, what?
All right.
I thought was too. All right. Anybody else got a quick one?
Just one comment, Wynn. We also picked the Halloween encounter in the graveyard. And I wonder if there's any brief discussion as to why so many of us picked that as to the other three, because the other three I can see being problematic for school kids at some point.
Because we like scary stories.
Well, I like scary stories. Yeah, I think that's the reason. I think we all think we don't have enough scary stories.
Well, the story about the woman who's getting dolled up for the guy, that's kind of getting into innuendo, and then the guy with more than one wife, that gets into a problematic area. And then you're dealing with divorce and poverty is really bad.
Yeah.
And so I think everybody gravitated toward that one because it was pretty systematically blocked out, and you
Right.
could a lot with it.
Right. Yeah. All right, so what I'm going to challenge you to do is take that handout back to your LOSO. And you might do this at a meeting and just see, let people practice changing stories. Find some other stories. Those I picked just because I thought they were pretty easily changeable and they were short. So you have been, I'm looking at the clock, we got a few minutes left, but you probably would like to be first in the food line. But also I want to say this is shameless hucksterism. I have put together a book of my stories. Actually, I did it for my family during COVID, and I have the Broomfield Spellbinders has printed copies of it, and they're on sale here today. And if you would like to have one, they cost $30. Any money made for it goes to the Broomfield Spellbinders. And we had it last year. We sold out that entire printing, and so I guess this is the third printing. If you want one, I'll be around. I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
Autograph?
I'll be happy. They're all already signed. If you want me to write something personal to you, I can do that. But anyway, we can take cash, check, or in a pinch, we can take a credit card if you're smart enough to make it work. So anyway, thank you for being such good listeners and such good participants.